Marty. What do you got for us today? Last time we were here, you riffed for an hour and 20 minutes off the top of your head.
Yeah.
And just lit up the mic.
So today, if you want to be successful, I think there's 3 words you need to know and understand: inspiration, motivation, and obsession. So today we're going to talk about what each of those 3 things mean and how do you get to be ultra successful. If you want to be at the top of your game, in your industry, or at your job, you have to be obsessed. You can't be inspired. You can't be motivated. You've got to be obsessed. We're going to get into those 3 things today. Stay tuned. Play Life Differently coming at you. So those 3 words, right? Inspiration, motivation, and obsession. There are varying degrees of people's successes, and there's numerous books and studies. We've looked at them, we've read them, and through our own experiences, we've learned, right, that every level of success transcends to another motivating factor, right? So when you first start, you might have an idea or hear a concept or or hear someone speak or you witness something, and that gives you some inspiration, right? It's the catalyst. It's like the little fire that just gets lit. And what's interesting about that is like that might create a little bit of emotion, right? And then you got to take some action. You got to get things done. And at some point you have some successes, then you get to some motivation, right? Because you can see some successes happening. You're getting past some small failures. And then, so that next level is motivation. But what ultra successful people end up becoming is obsessed. They're obsessed with their passion. They're obsessed with being the best at what they do. They're obsessed with the work that they're doing. And so it doesn't matter what industry, right? You look at some of the all-time greats. They're pretty obvious, right? You look at like Steve Jobs. He was obsessed with the consumer experience with Apple and the iPhone, right? You look at Michael Jordan. He was obsessed with winning. You look at Tiger Woods, obsessed with winning, right? To the point where he had blood on his hands after hitting 1,000 balls a day and he wouldn't leave the range in the rain. Like, they're ultra successful people become obsessed. Now, do they start there? No, not really. But what's interesting is, even somebody that is moderately successful, had some wins, and they start to listen to all the naysayers, right? You're obsessed. All you talk about is this. All you do is work. All you do is this, right? And the reality is, like, there can be work-life balance, but your mentality has to be so obsessed with your craft or your goal or what you're trying to achieve. We're going to dive into inspiration, motivation, and obsession today. But ultra successful people are absolutely obsessed. It's the one thing that psychologists point to, that research successful individuals, the books that are written on it. There is one thread that goes through all of those successful people, and it's their obsession, right? You look at even Kendra Scott, right? Kendra Scott was obsessed with figuring it out, right? And making it, the first billionaire female brand, right? Like, all of these people are ultra obsessed. And it doesn't mean you're obsessed about everything. You got to be obsessed about the 1 or 2 things that move the needle and get you closer to the goal. So let's first start a little bit with inspiration, right? I've got some definitions because I was trying to like dive in a little bit more, like, what's that inspiration really mean, right? And so what's interesting, the definition of inspiration is like that there's usually an external force or some kind of influence that sparks new ideas or creativity or some kind of emotion, right? So it's usually external to a degree, right? You're inspired by seeing, beautiful pictures of people on vacation. You're like, oh, you're inspired to go to, wherever that is. It could be Hawaii, it could be Mount Everest. It doesn't really matter. There's a little bit of something in you that creates some kind of emotional connection where you're like, I'd like to have that. And that's some inspiration, right? But it's external, to a great degree. And what's interesting about that is like, that's usually like short-lived. Inspiration is short-lived. And so people talk about successful people being disciplined or having systems in place, and all of that is true, right? But the inspiration turns into actionable items at some point. But discipline and having systems helps you create consistency when the inspiration leaves. And that's the key that they don't tell you. It's like, you're really inspired to start working out and doing your workout routines and doing it every day. But how many of us fall off that? Or you start a diet and you're really good. You're down a few pounds and, like, you were inspired, but like you haven't built the systems of how you meal prep, or, you don't have an accountability partner to keep you going through the point at which the inspiration or the emotion leaves you. Right. And they often say character is defined by what you do when no one else is looking. Right. But character is also defined by, doing the things you need to do when the feeling that got you started has left you. And that's inspiration. Inspiration can be the start of it, but you got to get to the next level. And I can give you countless examples of times being inspired, right? I've admitted, right? Like, I want to be healthy. I'd love to be ripped. I'm approaching 50, right? I've got Fit by 50, right? But like, I've got 17 months to go. And it's been an inspiration for 15, 20 years to get back to that. And it dawned on me recently, like, that, yeah, for me, it's an inspiration, right? I would love to look like that guy, or, be able to run 10 miles, or like, it's inspirational to see those things happening, right? But 2, 3, 4 weeks in, the inspiration's gone. Stop. Where are you going? Thanks for tuning in. Why are you here? Because you want to be successful. I'm going to tell you how to do it. We're going to cover that today. Click subscribe. Success comes from being obsessed, not motivation, not inspiration. It's obsession. What I've decided recently, right, and maybe I'll start showing some of this, is like, I need to become obsessed with Fit by 50, right? I need to get past the inspiration that left. I need to find the motivation, the second step, and then I need to get to a point where I'm obsessed, so that the obsession becomes part of my life in being Fit by 50. Like, stay tuned. That's a work in progress. I'm always growing, always working, right? Lifelong learner here. So I'm going to take this advice myself and turn the health part of my goals for me personally into become more obsessed with health, right? That doesn't mean that, like, I can let myself off the hook on a Wednesday night and cheat a little bit for dinner and have a beverage, whatever. That's not obsession. Obsession is pushing through the impulses and the negativity, or the random thoughts you have to do something different, right? So we'll get to the definition of obsession here in a minute too. So inspiration is that spark, right? Second step, motivation. How do you get motivated? People are like, oh, that was so motivating. That talk. Oh, I went to this seminar. The speaker's so motivating. And they're all fired up, right? What do they always say? Like, you go to a conference and you take a notebook page of all these great ideas, right? And then speakers started saying, hey, I just want you to come away with like 1 or 2 things you can implement. Well, why the hell are they saying that? What they're really saying is, like, pick 1 or 2 things you can become obsessed with, right? They're not saying it that way, but that's what they're really meaning, because people come back with 24 things to do, and then they don't implement any of them, and they're not consistent with it, right? So you could be motivated and hearing things and taking notes and reading books and all these things, but you have to get to the point where you take a couple of those and you get obsessed with them and you refine them and you become the master of that craft, right? So motivation transitions from inspiration into motivation when you start to internalize. So inspiration is the external creativity, idea, content gives you an idea, but motivation starts to switch it from being externally driven and motivated to internal. You start to internalize what that means for you, right? So now you're starting to find out a little bit about your why. Why are you doing the things? And they talk about purpose-driven life and find your why, what's most important to you. And the reason those exercises exist is because if you can have a purpose greater than yourself, now you're in the next phase of becoming successful at whatever the goal is. So motivation becomes more internal drive. It's pursuit of a goal with some external effort, right? You've got to set up systems to continue the motivation. You got to go back to, your goal list, right? You've written down the things you want to achieve. You got to have it posted on the fridge or the bathroom or your computer, right? All of those are just motivating pieces to remind you of the initial emotion, the initial inspiration, right? But to keep you moving forward. But it's not yet an obsession, right? Because you need external influences to keep the internal drive going. You can be highly successful being motivated. I would say that's the vast majority of successful people are highly motivated. They have goals, they have rewards that they're going after, sales rewards, they're going on sales trips, or, if they do X, Y, Z, they're going to take the family on a vacation. There's some motivation, right? That they're trying to internalize that. But what's interesting is, like, as you have more and more successes in finding motivation tricks and tips and tools that help you get there, the ultra successful, like the best of the best, the top 0.1%, in any particular category, right, are obsessed. So the difference about obsession than motivation, it is 100% internal. It's intense. It's persistent. You are preoccupied with that outcome or that activity or that goal. And so some of the best examples you could think of in modern day, right, like Michael Jordan, right? He was obsessed with winning. to the point where which this is kind of interesting. He said, over the years and being a Bulls fan, I've watched different interviews. Like he was obsessed with winning, and what he said was like he had some losses for sure, right? I mean, any successful person goes through failures, but an obsessed person doesn't look at a loss or a failure as a setback. They turn it into a tool to learn and become the master of their craft. So, Jordan was an all-time scorer, right? And then people said, well, he's just a scorer. He's not a defender. Guess what happened? Michael Jordan became MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, right? They said, oh, well, he can never win a championship because it's just him, right? He's a single player. Guess what happened? He created some of the best NBA players on the team, and they won 6 championships, right? So he turned failures or negative comments into obsessions, and then he worked on that relentlessly. It didn't matter, right? You hear the stories. He'd play 36 holes of golf, then he'd be drinking a couple beers doing that, and then he'd go play a game and he'd drop 45 or 50 points, right? He was obsessed with his craft and being the best. And because he had an obsession for winning. And so the other thing about obsession is most people that are obsessed don't put it in the hands of other people. They own it. It is so internal to them that the success lies 100% within what they think about, what they do every minute, every day. As you go through successes or you're trying to be successful, I think the key is to look at what's the difference between, am I feeling inspired right now? Am I feeling motivated? Or am I obsessed with this goal? And I think too often, right, we talk about being intentional with Play Life Differently, right? Your life has got to be intentional. And I think the first step is to understand the goal or the dream that you have for you to be successful. Where does that sit? Like, use your words, right? Do you just feel inspired to have that goal? Like it's a wish and it's a want, right? Or are you motivated and you're driven to get that goal, right? Or are you absolutely obsessed, meaning it doesn't matter what it takes to win, you're going to get it done. Now we could go off, on a tangent, talk about the ethical ways to do all that. And there certainly are, but I think as part of when we look at playing life differently and being intentional and understanding your values and your beliefs, as you drill down from being inspired to motivated to obsessed, those absolutely should be aligned with your values and your beliefs, right? So when I think about the things that I've achieved and the setbacks I've had, I'm looking at the things that I'm obsessed with. And so the one I would tell you is like probably, when we launched E9 Club, right? COVID, and I may have shared this story. I got inspired, right? So the first step was I got inspired. There's a couple buddies that had another indoor facility, 20 guys. They all pitched in and they built it, in a little commercial garage, and they enjoyed it, right? They had access whenever they wanted. It was a pretty cool setup, but it was rudimentary, right? But it was a cool space. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like I'd love to do that. I'd love to play golf year round, not take a break in the winter. And so that was the inspiration, right? And then, I reached out to my buddy. I was like, hey, I got this idea. Let's create this golf club, but it's going to be a little different. So then the inspiration changed a little bit more into motivation. So now there was a drive because I had a partner with me that could see the vision. So then we became motivated together, and we had this internal drive to like develop it, fine tune it, and go build it. Right? We started to do that. We started taking small steps, motivation, right? You start taking small actions on things to get things done. We found some property, right? We found an architect. We had all these kind of steps in place, found a builder, and we're like, okay, this is coming to life. And they're just small little phone calls here and there, but all of a sudden you're like, it's getting some momentum, but it's still kind of internal. We didn't really know what it would look like. And then we get to the point where like, okay, now we're ready to go. Actually, the rubber meets the road. We're going to go build. We're going to go get it done. We got to get bank funding. We got to get it. Like, how are we going to make this successful? How are we going to make it viable? How are we going to make it profitable? And I could think about that timeline, right? From the inspiration, like fall of 2019, to then having the conversation in January of 2020 with my buddy, to then, finding a place to lease and like, summer of 21, to then starting the build out and then having to go get financing and then figuring out how we're going to be profitable. I went from inspiration to motivation to them being obsessed. And I kid you not, man, it was every night, every weekend. I'd wake up at 2-3 in the morning with an idea. I'd have to get out of bed, go write it down. I'd spend 2-3 hours in the middle of the night just mapping it out, doing the finances, figuring out the market stuff. I was obsessed with making it work. And what's interesting along the way, and things that you learn, right? So we had that idea, and we were in the motivation phase, right? So we were like, that summer we got our lease signed, and we're sitting there playing with some golf with some buddies, at our local club, and holy cow, man, the amount of negative comments we got, right? And it would kind of detract us from what we were like really focused on. But it's like, well, you got to do it here. You got to do it in a strip mall. You got to do it like this, or like, that'll never work. It's got to be by the hour. They got to be punch cards. They were throwing out all this stuff, telling us all the ways the way we wanted to do it would not work, and totally self-defeated during motivation phase, totally self-defeating. Right. And then when we got to the obsessed phase, where it was like every day, it was 30 times a day, we're texting and calling each other. Then we're meeting at, 8:00 at night on a phone call and on the phone for 3 or 4 hours. Like, the obsession took over, and then it didn't matter what people said, right? What needs to get done? Let's go get it done. Like, this is next, right? And you make some mistakes along the way, but we were obsessed with getting it open in 4 months, and we did it, right? Why? Because like that was became the obsession. Here's the date. It was in April. Like, we got to hit that, and we got to do whatever we can. We got to get the financing lined up. We got to make sure the contractors are moving. For me, that's a very clear example of transitioning from an idea, an inspiration, to transition to more internally being motivated to just get some small things done along the way, and then to obsession. Obsession, I look at all of the successful people. Doesn't matter, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, all of them are obsessed, right? All Olympic athletes, they're obsessed, right? You hear stories of them training and doing all this things. Like, how do they do that, right? Like Elon Musk sleeping on a couch or on the floor of a factory. Like, why would he do that, right? I mean, he's got a lot of money. He can go home, go to bed. Whereas he was obsessed with the goal.